For me personally, I've been doing environmental advocacy for about now professionally for 4 years, and then a year and a half before that as a volunteer. Um, I kind of started my journey on the grassroots side of things, driving people around, moving supplies around, trying to get frontliners to where they needed to be to stop oil pipelines. And I kind of burned out and ended up kind of by luck stumbling into the policy side of environmental advocacy, and it just clicked with me. Um, I love it. This is what I want to be doing with my life. And I think for some folks, they enjoy fighting for the environment in other ways. And I'm a big believer in whatever tactics and skills you have, use what you're passionate about to fight for what you believe in. But I think for folks where government advocacy really clicks for them, they can be super effective. And we'll talk about that a little bit. But I'll just sort of start with an introduction of we're all kind of this is like a secret game almost, where not a lot of people are doing this, but the few that get involved with local government and throw their weight behind a particular cause have a huge impact. It's disproportionate. Like one person has the impact of dozens and dozens of people. And if you get a crew of 3 to 4 people together, well, you can change a city. And I'm not even kidding. So we'll get into that. Let's talk about local government advocacy. So again, just want to highlight another upcoming Sustainability Week topic. Well, this is part of the Plastics Free Day. So we will have some examples of local plastics ordinances to look at. There are some examples of jurisdictions that have passed these sort of ordinances. This is something personally I haven't been super involved in, is on the plastic side of things. So I think if you have any specific questions here, you can click on the links in this PowerPoint or reach out to Linda about this. But just wanted to highlight some of the resources here for plastics-free ordinances. And kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, local government advocacy really does matter. And my advice is just try it just a little bit, and you'll be surprised with the impact you can have. And once you realize that the action you've taken has manifested in a new policy that exists in a city, or maybe they changed the wording of a law according to what you've recommended, once you see that real world tangible impact of your work, for me, it's almost like an addiction. It's such a good feeling to know that oh my God, I helped participate in a campaign that banned gas pipelines in a city. That just feels good. And I hope that you all feel that many times as environmental advocates going forward. So if I were to go back to myself in high school, if I were to time travel, back when I was kind of just wasting my time and didn't think that I actually had any political power at the time, what would I tell myself? I would say, 1, you have way more political power than you realize. 2, it's okay that you're not an expert yet, and that it's actually okay if you ask for help. And 3, failing is normal, and learning from our mistakes is actually a good thing. And that 4, it doesn't really matter what you do as long as you show up. So I'm going to tell you about advocacy today, but if these tactics don't really fit what you want to do and you find another way to fight for what you believe in, heck yeah, do it. Advocacy is all about showing up, even if it's just kind of like Linda said, just trying it once, trying one public comment, maybe sending in one email, seeing how that feels. Showing up is a really important thing as advocates. And yeah, I had these sort of barriers to myself getting into advocacy. I didn't think I had the expertise. I didn't want to fail on a public stage. I didn't really think I had any power, so why even try? Politics just seemed like this untouchable, coiled snake that would not do anything if I poked at it. And when we poke the snake, it moves a lot. And yeah, we have a ton of power. So I want to talk about, getting into the practical side of things. What does it actually mean as an advocate who wants to influence local government? Where do we start? Where do we even begin? Local government advocacy, I kind of think of it like its own game. It's like a game that operates according to its own internal set of rules. And once you figure out how to play that game and how to navigate those systems, you can be really, really effective. And so I have some basic principles that I adhere to as an advocate that help me navigate these systems. And these are principles you can apply to yourself in any jurisdiction to help figure out how to influence something. So number one is I figure out what the power structure is. Am I influencing a local city? Am I influencing a county, which instead of a city council, they have something called a board of supervisors, which is like same thing, different name. Am I influencing the state legislature? Do I want to influence a school board? And if so, I find the people in those power structures. So who actually occupies positions of power? How can I contact them? And then once I figured out what the institution is, who's in the institution, I then figure out how the institution functions. And that comes down to how meetings are run. So figuring out the agenda of public meetings and then planning my strategy around the structure of that meeting to get results. So Linda's linked a link to the Contra Costa calendar. I'll tab at some point in this presentation, and we can find a city and find an agenda and explore it together. And I talked a little bit about, finding out who the people are. And this slide sort of breaks it down into three major pressure points. So the first are your decision makers, the people who are actually approving stuff and voting on laws. And these are your city council members. And then for county governments, they're called the board of supervisors. Basically, nothing happens in these jurisdictions without the expressed approval of this body. They're the main decision makers. They vote on laws. They tell their staff what to do. They're incredibly influential, and they are the end-all be-all of decision-making in these situations. So if you don't have the city council on your side, you're not going to get a whole lot accomplished in a city. But they certainly aren't the only people we influence. There are also commissions and committees. These are sometimes elected, most often appointed people. They're appointed by council members usually. Commissions and committees review policy, and they're like an advisory body. So they make recommendations to the elected officials as to what they should do. So here's an example. Like, let's say a city is updating a plan for how to manage its parks. That draft plan might go to like the Parks and Recreation Commission before it goes to the city council. And at that Parks and Recreation Commission meeting, the commission might make recommendations for how to modify that parks policy. And then they send those recommendations off to the city council, who at a future date will discuss those and vote on the law. So far we've got elected officials, advisory bodies like commissions and committees, and then the third piece of the equation, and certainly not the least, is staff. Staff are the people who are actually creating the policy, they're writing the laws, they're receiving direction from elected officials, they're receiving input from the public. So they're the people on the ground doing the stuff, and influencing staff can be really, really powerful because let's say you find out, let's again use the example of a parks and recreation plan in a city. If a city is doing a parks plan and you know the staff who's working on the parks plan, you can be like, hey, I've identified some areas where the city is lacking tree canopy coverage. Maybe consider putting some native plants and pollinator corridors in these areas. And you've sent staff the resources and information, and what do you know, in the final parks plan, if you've communicated with staff, sometimes they'll put in stuff you asked for, and you don't even need to get the city council to tell staff to do something if staff is already on board with what you're doing. So these three pressure points all kind of influence each other, right? Staff writes the laws that go to the city council for approval. And sometimes the city council listens to the opinions of the commissions and committees that are reviewing these laws. And a lot of times city council wants to know what staff thinks of something. And of course, staff wants to hear what the city council thinks when they're writing their laws. So if you are influencing these three pressure points, you are, pushing the government at basically all of the important stages that policy is being shaped at, right? Staff has its hands on the clay, the commissions have their hands on the clay, the city council puts the clay in the oven and bakes it. So wherever we can get into this process and get our fingerprints on that clay before it gets into the oven is incredibly influential. And as we are influencing cities through these pressure points, I'm always looking to find a champion. I'm thinking, okay, who within the city agrees with me, and how can I help that person who already agrees with me leverage their strength to get something accomplished. So let's say, for an example, maybe we have a staff person that we really like, but the council's a little iffy. That staff person says like, I really want to do this, but you know, the public has to really be calling for this for me to be able to put it in my report. And sometimes you might have like a climate champion on the city council who says, I want to do a bunch of climate work this year, but I want to make sure I have the public backing me up for that before I stick my neck out there and propose these, aggressive policies. So working with your champion is basically how policy gets accomplished. You find the people that agree with you within the city, develop those relationships, and then maximize your power. Also want to talk a little bit about strong mayor and weak mayor cities a little bit. In strong mayor cities, agendas are set by the 4-year mayor. In strong mayor cities, kind of like the name implies, the mayor has a lot of power in setting the agendas for the city. And so having the mayor be your champion can be really powerful in a city like that. And if the mayor doesn't agree with you in a city like that, it can be kind of tough. And in weak mayor cities, the power is more spread out around council. So the mayor has some input, but it's the elected officials in this case are more equal in terms of their power. All right, let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about agendas. And I guess if there's one sort of functional thing to take away from this presentation, which is I would love for everyone to walk away from this PowerPoint presentation with the knowledge of how to find agendas for their city and how to read them to plan your strategy. So all of these jurisdictions, all these cities and counties have public meetings that we can attend, and they plan out their meetings sequentially in an agenda. So, they'll hear one item after another item after another item, and cities can only really take action on what's in the agenda. So if they want to pass a law, if they want to implement a policy, that action has to be agendized ahead of time so that the public can review it and make comments on it before the city actually takes action. What this means is it's kind of difficult to get a city to actually do something if that thing you want them to do is not on the agenda. And sometimes half of the battle is just getting the city to put what you want them to do onto the agenda so you can actually discuss it and take action and vote on it. So let's see here. I will pop off of this PowerPoint. And I guess this will be a great time for anyone either in the chat or unmute yourself. Just name a jurisdiction you're interested about.
Connor had his hand up. I don't know if that was from before. Connor, I don't know if that was related to this.
That was just related to the question about having no prior experience. But
Okay.
Particularly, I'm interested in Contra Costa and Lafayette.
Cool. So let's actually go to the calendar link here. That's perfect. Sorry, not the wrong calendar. All right. And I don't know if the top of my search bar got cut off there by what I have on my screen, but I just typed in Contra Costa meeting agendas. That's generally what I do. I just type in jurisdiction, meeting agendas, board meeting agendas and videos, Contra Costa County. I've actually never researched this jurisdiction before because I'm not active in this jurisdiction. So we are exploring it together, and you get to see how me, an advocate, navigates a jurisdiction I've never been in. Okay, cool. So I want to find agendas for this current year. So I'll click on this. Great. And now we have a list of meetings here. We can see some future meetings coming up. The agendas haven't been posted, it looks like. Let's go to yesterday's Board of Supervisors meeting. Oh, wait, there's a meeting yesterday, a special meeting of the Sustainability Committee. That's exciting. Okay, but let's go to the Board of Supervisors meeting. So some basic things to keep in mind with any agenda. Well, any agenda I've seen, which is that the Zoom link to join is at the top. I can think of one city in my territory that has in-person only. For me, that's the city of Gilroy. So just a slight word of caution, there's a small chance that your jurisdiction might not allow you to join via Zoom, but most jurisdictions do. And you'll find that Zoom link to join at the top of the agenda. as I said earlier, agendas are read from top to bottom. So looks like they start here at 9 a.m. Wow, that's amazing. And let's see, they have a closed session here.
That is
Okay.
actually an exception. Most of the cities meet in our county, in the evenings, but the
Mhm.
Board of Supervisors do meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays in the mornings. Something to keep in mind.
Yeah, for me, I'm usually used to like a 6 to 7 p.m. meeting start time. So when I see 9 a.m., I'm like, oh, wow. Okay, so there's a few things I want to talk about that are on most agendas that can sort of help you as an advocate navigate this document. First, again, they're read from top to bottom. So if an item is above another item, it's going to be heard first. Let's see here. I also want to talk about consent items. So the consent calendar is a way for cities to do their business efficiently. They take all of the what are called consent items and they bundle them together. They actually don't talk about each item individually and they don't vote on each item individually. They do it all at once. So they say, okay, motion to approve the consent calendar. The board votes and they say, okay, approve. And then that's it. Every single individual item that's a part of the consent calendar has now been approved. This is a way for cities to rapidly address a whole bunch of non-controversial items. And if an item does become controversial, the city or an elected official can say, I'd like to pull item, let's say, C1 from the consent calendar. That item then becomes it outside of the consent calendar and it's discussed individually and voted on individually. And the reason why this is important is because a lot of times when I'm considering, let's say there's an item down here. Let's say I was really interested in, an item down here on the agenda. If there's a really long consent calendar before that, it may give the impression like, oh, I have to wait a whole bunch of time before coming in to speak, but like, no, all those like 30 consent calendar items are going to get approved all at once. So you actually may only have to wait like half an hour for them to get through that. So consent calendar bundled together all at once. Most other agendas will have like or most agendas will also have an opportunity for you to comment on items that are not on the agenda. This is also another really important item to keep in mind. Sometimes it's called oral communications. Sometimes it's called verbal communications. Sometimes jurisdictions don't have it, but they really, most jurisdictions I've seen do. And the critical item you're going to want to look for is like discussion for items not on the agenda. And Linda, actually going to want to call you in here. Do you see an opportunity on Contra Costa's agenda for this? Because I would see it here. So
actually what you're looking at has
is
a
this
close, it has a closed session. So yeah, they have public comments. See at the
yes,
top,
closed
it's
session,
a
perfect.
conference. So that's something else to keep an eye out. So at 9 a.m. they have a closed session that you can't attend, but then there should be the open session. And I think that was where the, is that the beginning? It's a little hard, but there is a always by law required opportunity for public comment on items not on the agenda, and it usually is at the beginning. See, it says adjourn in memory of honorable, so that's where it adjourns, and then it starts again, or
With
that's
consent.
that's the consent items and the attachments. So the actual agenda as you pass through is, I think that's still consent. All the C items are still all consent. So the Board of Supervisors have a lot of things just like approved spending or contracts. It's a little hard to tell what's going on there, where the meeting starts and where that attachment is. It's possible you opened up a meeting that's
this looks like it's
only a closed session, but if it were, it wouldn't have all those consent items. So something we're missing something here.
let's see.
So like, so some of these special committees may not be required under the Brown Act to have a public comment period
Mhm.
then. Right there,
Mhm.
it says right there, item 2, public comment on any
Perfect.
item, not on the, yeah.
Mhm.
Well, there you go. Firsthand exploration of how it can be confusing. So don't give
Mhm.
up, persevere.
Yes, and this is actually perfect. Yeah, a lot of times I'm just clicking around, not really knowing what I'm doing. Well, kind of knowing what I'm doing, but like trying to figure out where stuff is. So if you feel like you're a little lost in here, that's totally okay. Sometimes all it takes is for you to see like, oh, this is closed session. Okay, I can't talk. But any open session will have, here we go, public comment on any item under the jurisdiction of the committee and not on the agenda. I just want to highlight this. Look for this on any agenda item you have. And again, this is why it's important. I talked about kind of half the battle being getting stuff onto the agenda. Let's say I want the city to pass a climate action plan, but they have no discussion of it, none whatsoever. My plan would be to go to that city at every public meeting that I could, and just for my public comment, say, hi, my name's Dashel. I'm a community member here. I believe in climate change, and I see the city doesn't have a climate action plan. So please put a discussion of creating a climate action plan as a future agenda item. And if you just come back to the city and hammer them over and over and over again about something they're not doing, sometimes they just relent and they put it on the agenda. Yeah, I've been very surprised to see this work, not only in my territories, but also hearing stories from other advocates who have just showed up during this item and, spoke their mind, and just through sheer force of showing up over and over again, and maybe being annoying in a respectful way, getting that accomplished. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint.